And in this story, we see this, moment of insertion of how these lives intersect. This woman, hemorrhaging woman in Jairus now intersect. Jairus is probably still walking with Jesus. He's probably thinking in the back of his mind, come on, my daughter's dying. And Jesus knows that they both will be cared for. Two lives interconnecting, Jairus and this woman, all lives connecting. I thought as I was reading this today and knowing this is my last time officially to stand here and to share my priestly ministry with you, that I kind of thought, isn't this interesting? Because this has been a short term, less than 23 months. Came here August 2019. And I thought, this is kind of providential that maybe our lives became like an intercalation. Two lives coming together. Both of us, we take turns in this intercalation. At one point, my short story into your longer story, my 2 years into your 47 years as a parish, your 2 years and me of my 39 years as a priest. And the interwovenness, of Jesus' ministries and ours at the same time. And just as, in Mark's gospel, the shorter story usually gives meaning to the larger story or brings it out, that both of our stories hopefully have given meaning to one another as you have given to mine. And in the story of Mark's gospel, neither story kind of dwarfs the other at the same time. But both Jairus and his daughter and the woman both seem to come to the fore and bring out fully the best in both. And the wideness of Jesus' mercy in all of that. When I stood here less than 2 years ago, August 2019, the first weekend of August, I brought with me an empty box. I remember my image of just saying, I was packing a lot from the Catholic community of South Baltimore, moving here, and I thought, taking a lot of stuff to here. I thought, what am I going to take from here? So I used that empty box. The day I brought the box back, first of all, I had to find an empty box as I'm moving again. It wasn't easy. And because I think what I take from here, some of these things are personal, as our lives intersected, and some of them of ecclesiastical, church nature. What learnings, what memories, things I did not have even able to be in my box before until I came here. And one very personal one, and I thank you for sharing the time with me on that, is I now own my brother Michael's chalice. He died soon after I came here, my brother, priest of the Archdiocese. And of course, it was a very, and still is very impactful for me. But I have now the constant privilege of celebrating with it. And I was glad to be able to celebrate it with you, because many of you helped me mourn through that process and are still helping me mourn through it. When you lose not just a brother, but you lose one who shares your own vocation. Not easy. But as much as something like that is personal, there's a lot of ecclesiastical, universal things, that I take. This was a very different time this past year, as we all know, around the world, globally. And we kind of were in kindred spirits with everybody around the world, all parishes, all churches, all peoples. And one symbol that is certainly, I think, kind of collective for all of us is our blue rags, Though it's just a woven cloth, it took on meaning, I think. As everyone very dutifully, very conscientiously, very deliberately each week cleaning a pew, and it's not just cleaning a piece of wood, but making sure the people behind you coming in next to worship have it as safe a place as anybody could. And to see every week people, without fail, getting in the rag, cleaning it, putting it back, And it just is a reminder, of that kind of community care for one another in the sense of, being mindful even to the point as, as Go the Mass has ended, you could already hear, instead of, a closing hymn, kind of the squishing of the bottles. It was almost became, a hymn in and of itself. Fortunately, this is the first weekend we do not have to do this, There's one person, I believe she's still here, Denise Jones, who took these rags home every week and cleaned them. Thank you, Denise, if you're here this morning. And to thank Mike DuPont. When you leave today, come back in and look at the pews. Look at this side versus that side. This side has been varnished and kind of reinvigorated. We're still going through it. Thank you, Michael, for caring for that. Probably the one thing that also is this church has here now that we didn't have before, in this worship space, and probably worship spaces all over, is cameras. And what cameras have become for us as church. What that means and how churches change because of it. And the 2 cameras in the back there installed, one in the hall. And cameras, they made the world smaller. They made the church smaller, the universal church smaller. And in some ways, that was a great gift. People sharing stories of, didn't make your Mass here, Father, but, I watched, the Pope, on Christmas Eve in the Vatican. Or, I needed to attend, but I couldn't to. But from my living room, I could attend, my grandniece's first communion, which they would not have been able to do without the camera. So there's a sense it made the world smaller, the church smaller, more connectedness as we kind of zoomed in one to another. But at the same time, this particular period of time made us all more distant. And that's an interesting conundrum. I think a nice thing to ponder, which I'm still doing, how we became smaller but more distant at the same time. Not out of choice, but just because of social distancing and all, and the impact that had on all of us personally and collectively, ecclesiastically, and what the effects of that will be in years to come. As people lived in isolation and feeling of abandonment, though the lens of a camera helps a lot as we zoomed in to feel close, there's still that sense that we're not there. Because a lens is also kind of a telescope, kind of being able to see the world, allow things to feel closer, like, look in a telescope and the moon now looks like it's, right on top of you. But it also became, nicely, I think, a microscope as you kind of look at something minute, and you see things differently for the first time, or you see them again for the first time through a lens. And I think this year made us think about, what does church mean to us? What does Eucharist mean to us? We notice things that we did not notice before, because we had the opportunity to see them. We see things more clearly with them. It would not have happened if it wasn't for the pandemic. There are good things that come from things that we find very unfortunate. Always a silver lining, they say. Probably one very an attribute of St. Bernadette I take with me is just that care for neighbor, no matter how near or far that neighbor is. I remember one day, it was before we even had the cameras and staff, we had the high top table here, a computer zooming me in, and our daily bread couldn't really feed everybody because they couldn't, get everyone in. The casseroles couldn't come in. And I pulled out a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter at the altar, and I said, our daily bread needs these. Could people drop them off? That was March of 2020. And you're still dropping them off. Thank you. Because the poor we will always have with you. And it went from there to, blue bin on my front porch. Bin gets emptied. I bring it over. This is some from yesterday's. Bring it over here. We put it in. St. Vincent de Paul Society from Christ the King comes over, picks them up every Monday, and that man's truck gets filled every week. And then the bin gets filled every day in front of my porch, on my porch. And it reminds me of that reading from 1 Kings from the widow Zarephath, who had her last oil and her last cup of flour to feed her child, but Elijah asked, "Can you feed me?" And she gave all. She gave it all. And the next morning she came back, and there was more flour and more oil. And every day that she gave all, there was more to come back. And that's what the blue bin on my front porch looks like. People always, your grace, cooperating with God's, to feed all. Whether it's the people here right in Anne Arundel County through the St. Vincent de Paul Society, through its feeding the people at St. Gregory's and caring for them, little next Concentral Circle, or obviously the meals for children at Haiti. The world becomes smaller and we become more aware of everyone's needs. Every saint has an attribute, like shamrocks for Patrick and tools for Joseph. I think for St. Bernadette, this parish should ask if she could hold either, a loaf of bread or a globe, about feeding the local, feeding the world's poor. But we all take our next part of the story. For in the sandwich, we've done one piece of toast, and now we put on the bacon in it or whatever. My story into your story a little bit. But the next piece of journey, the story's not unfinished. As in the seventh pastor, Father Austin Murphy comes here begins his ministry this particular week. And every person, whether it's your first pastor, Father Mylan, down to the seventh one, stories begin to intertwine. Each learns something from one to another. And it's coming at an appropriate time, I think. It's interesting. Father Murphy, hopefully, he doesn't mind me not calling him out, but sharing this. Both St. Bernadette and Father Austin Murphy, you both have entered your 50th year of life. This parish was founded in 1972, as he was born in 1972. And I love numbers and calendars and things like that, and I think it's kind of a nice optic of maybe how to both growing kind of old together, sharing your wisdom together, sharing where you've been together, and knowing you've been together all these years, growing up together. And he gets to be part of that story now. He's part of the intercalation. May the two stories be like the one in the gospel. Each, your story and Father Murphy's story, complementing and contrasting all at the same time. And it's in the contrast and complement that both stories grow. Just like in the gospel, both Jairus and the hemorrhaging woman are better because they met the other. I'm sure St. Bernadette and Father Murphy and Christ the King's people will be better for meeting the other. I'm certainly better for meeting you.